the sound of metal hitting wood. That's how it started. Not a conversation, not a letter, not even a phone call. He tossed a set of keys across the conference table in front of 23 people, and smiled while he did it. The kind of smile that isn't about happiness, it's about power, it's about an audience. It's about making absolutely sure everyone in that room understood exactly what was happening and exactly who was in control. The keys had a faded orange keychain. Number 7, stamped into the plastic. Run Wayright stared at that keychain for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, before anyone else in the room understood anything, she already knew. This wasn't a retirement gift. This was a joke. One designed to humiliate her in front of every person she had worked beside for 12 years. She picked up the keys, said nothing, and walked out. 72 hours later, the man who threw those keys would be standing in that same warehouse, completely silent, with nothing left to say. This is that story. Before we talk about what happened in that Texas warehouse, you need to understand who Run Wayright actually was, not who they assumed she was, not what they decided she was worth after one look. Who she actually, genuinely was. She was 38 years old. Black hair cut short, no vanity in the decision, just practicality. Hands calloused in exactly the right places from years of real work, not office handshakes. And a thin scar on her right index finger from a wrench that slipped on a freezing afternoon when she was 15 years old. Trying alone to fix her dead father's pickup truck 3 months after the funeral. She carried that scar the way other people carry photographs. Not with grief. With the quiet, permanent awareness that some things stay in the body to remember what the mind cannot hold alone. For 12 years she had worked at Ashford Cargo. 12 years of arriving before everyone else. Leaving after everyone else. Diagnosing trucks that certified technicians had declared beyond repair. 12 years of being the best in that building while everyone pretended not to notice. That morning, all 12 years came down to one table, one set of keys, one man's smile. Her father was Armand Wayright, a man who fixed engines with his hands and explained every single part with the patience of someone who knows, absolutely knows, that he is passing on something that will outlast him. Something no school will ever teach. Something no certificate on any war can give or take away. He would crouch beside an engine block on cold mornings, flashlight propped just right against the metal, hands black with grease, and speak quietly, precisely, like every word mattered because every word did. Run, he would say. A machine never lies to you. It's people who lie about it. You learn to listen to the engine, you know everything you need to know. She was 8 years old the first time she heard that. She was 11 when she began to truly understand it. It was not a metaphor. It was not poetry. It was a technical instruction. An engine communicates through sound, vibration, temperature, smell, and resistance. A breakdown speaks its own language, a language that arrives before any fault code on any scanner ever built. Whoever learns that language first carries something technology cannot replicate, because technology translates, and translation always loses something from the original. Armand died when Run was 15. Brake failure on a mountain descent near Tehachapi Pass. A March afternoon. A truck he had flagged for service 3 weeks earlier, whose owner had looked at him and said, "It can wait." She wasn't there when it happened. She found out when she came home from school and saw her mother's face in the doorway. Some expressions don't need words to deliver what they carry. The body understands before the mind is ready. She didn't fall apart. She wasn't built that way, or maybe she was built that way and chose differently. She kept his tools, organized exactly as he had left them. She kept his words, stored somewhere deeper than memory. And she kept the quiet, absolute, unshakable conviction that she would continue what he had started. Not as a memorial. Not as grief dressed up as purpose, because it was simply the only thing that made complete sense to do. 3 months after the funeral, she went to the garage alone, picked up his wrench, tried to fix his truck. The wrench slipped in the cold, left a scar on her right index finger that never fully faded. She finished the repair anyway. Run joined Ashford Cargo at 26, after a decade of freelance work at roadside garages and fleet shops, willing to hire a woman because her resume was impossible to ignore, and who then discovered the actual work was even better than the resume had promised. Dorian Ashford had hired her personally, after she diagnosed in 40 minutes a problem on a Kenworth T680 that had been sitting idle for 3 days while 2 certified technicians stood over it with nothing to show. He said that day, in the tone of a man granting a favor to someone who should feel grateful, "You've got talent, sweetheart. I'll give you a shot." She took the job without commenting on the tone. For 12 years, She swallowed the comments. The "you're good for a woman," the "lucky you've got the touch," the "imagine if you were a man." She swallowed all of it because she needed the paycheck, and because she believed with a stubbornness she couldn't always fully explain that the work spoke louder than any comment ever could. What she would discover the morning those keys landed on the table was that sometimes the work needs to roar before anyone chooses to finally listen. Dorian Ashford was 53 years old. Grey linen blazer that cost more than Run's monthly salary. Rolex Daytona on his left wrist, cuff deliberately pulled back so no one in any room could ever miss it. He had inherited Ashford Cargo from his father 20 years earlier when the company had 11 trucks and 2 small warehouses in a forgettable Texas town. Today, 84 trucks, 5 facilities across 3 states. A revenue figure he managed to drop into every conversation that lasted more than 2 minutes. Usually around the 3rd minute, with the casual ease of someone mentioning the weather outside. What he never mentioned was that a significant part of that growth had come from mechanics like Run, who kept every truck in that fleet operational while he attended business lunches and collected handshakes. That was a detail Dorian had so completely removed from the story. He told about himself that he no longer remembered it had ever existed. Beside him sat Garrett Mercer, new head of operations, 31 MB from Dallas. The kind of man whose smile reaches his eyes approximately 1 second after it reaches his mouth, as if it passes through an approval process before being displayed. He believed, with total conviction, that mechanics would be made obsolete by algorithms within a decade. 2 men, 1 table, 23 witnesses, and a broken truck no one had been able to fix in 4 years. She started with the multimeter and checked the battery voltage to 12.4 volts. Adequate, but not ideal. The kind of reading that explains nothing on its own, yet quietly points you toward the next place to look. She moved to the fuse box beneath the passenger side dashboard. What she found stopped her hand in midair for exactly 2 seconds. 3 fuses were wrong. Not Cummins X15 specification, but 30 AMP passenger car fuses sitting inside a system that required 50 amps to function correctly. Someone had opened the panel during the years that truck sat idle and installed whatever was available. It was the mistake of a technician treating a symptom instead of diagnosing a cause. Wrong fuses alone didn't explain everything. There was something deeper, something layered beneath the obvious, and she could feel it in the way the information was adding up. Problems reveal themselves slowly when you're patient enough to let them. She moved her hand to the main wiring harness and began reading it with her fingertips. Her fingers found it before her eyes did. A splice in the harness, wrapped in thick electrical tape with a wire bent tightly around a metal bracket. Someone had cut and rejoined the wire after a short circuit, using whatever materials were nearby. From the outside it looked careful, even professional. Inside, it had failed completely. After 4 years without airflow, the copper beneath the tape had oxidized into a dull gray-green. The splice carried just enough resistance to weaken the signal passing through it, and that wire carried the command from the ECM to the pilot injector on cylinder 1. The engine cranked because the starter system worked. It died because cylinder 1 never received a strong enough injection signal to fire. Without that confirmation, the remaining cylinders waited for a response that never came. A cascade failure hidden inside a repair that looked perfect. No scanner caught it. The resistance stayed within what the system accepted as cold weather variation. You had to touch it to know. Garrett Mercer appeared at the shop entrance while she worked, arms crossed, tablet tucked under his arm. He stood far enough to observe without participating, already convinced of what he expected to see. Run didn't look up. She cut through the old tape in one clean motion. The oxidized splice caught the afternoon light immediately. Garrett stepped closer and stared for 3 seconds before speaking. He said it wouldn't be enough to lock up the engine. Run looked at him with a calm that carried more weight than any argument. Combined with the Run amperage fuses, she explained, it was enough. She asked whether he wanted a walkthrough of the electrical logic or preferred to confirm it with his 6-figure scanner. Garrett said nothing and walked away, already reaching for his phone. Run returned to the harness. The repair took 40 minutes. Not because it was difficult, but because she refused to rush. She cleaned the copper until it shone, soldered with the correct alloy, and sealed the joint with perfectly sized heat shrink tubing. Every step was deliberate. She tested continuity before closing anything, because testing before closing is the difference between fixing something and believing you did. The wrong fuses were replaced with correct 50 MP units. Every connection was checked by sight and by touch. She climbed into the cab. 5 employees stood nearby, close enough to watch, far enough to distance themselves from failure. Run adjusted her seat, took one breath, and turned the key. The starter engaged just before, then everything changed. The Cummins X15 woke up cleanly, deeply, without hesitation. The sound wasn't noise, it was presence, filling the yard and vibrating through the ground. After 4 years of silence, the engine was running. Run held the wheel and let the vibration move through her body. It wasn't pride, it was confirmation. Of everything she knew, and everything others had doubted. Dorian Ashford came down when Garrett called him. He walked with confidence, toward information he believed would be wrong. When he saw the truck and heard it run, his pace slowed. He stood 15 feet away with no response prepared. She started it again so he could hear it himself. The sound carried through the warehouse and into the yard. Dorian watched until silence became the only thing he had left. He asked how long it took. She said 45 minutes. He asked what was wrong. She told him everything: the splice, the fuses, the cascade failure, no scanner flagged. Then she said the sentence she would once have swallowed. Any real Cummins technician would have found it in under an hour. 11 people stood watching. Dorian said nothing. The truck was hers. She drove it to her brother's garage and spent 3 weeks restoring every system properly. When the work was done, she painted the cab emerald. Not new, restored. The first call came from New Mexico, then another. There was no plan, only the work, and the work found her. Ashford Cargill began losing contracts within months. Dorian eventually called and offered her triple her salary. She declined and named her consulting rate. He accepted without argument. On her final day inspecting the remaining fleet, Dorian stood nearby without his blazer or his Rolex. He said he was wrong to let her go. She said she knew, and went back to the truck. She put the Peterbilt in gear and rolled onto the open road. The engine settled into its rhythm, steady and certain. The emerald paint caught the September sun. The highway opened ahead. Competence has no gender. Real knowledge waits quietly until the moment it's allowed to speak. Run didn't need revenge. She needed a wrench, a more timider, and 45 minutes. The rest took care of itself.